Hello and thank you for joining us for Local 3 News. I'm Rebecca Bartlemay, and joining me is Katie Johnson from Yooper Service Dogs and Kate Larley, an attorney at Coco. So thank you ladies for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Definitely. And so Katie, do you just want to start off with telling us what Yooper Service Dogs is?
Sure. Yooper Service Dogs is a service dog organization, which for most people the first thing they think of is service dog training, which that's absolutely one of the things that we do. But we do a lot more than that too. For instance, it's not real common for someone who runs a service dog organization to come on with an attorney, because we actually also help businesses too. We get calls from businesses at times that they're having trouble with dogs coming in and barking nonstop, or urinating on the floor, or all of these things that obviously they can't really tolerate in a place of business. And they're wondering, what can we do about that? Do I have a right to do anything at all? I don't want to violate their rights, but at the same time I have to protect my business. And so that's one of the things we do. Education, mediation, and training is pretty much sums up. Anything that is related to dogs and disabilities in the UP is probably something that we handle.
Definitely. And so you focus on service dogs, but there is different types of dogs. There's therapy dogs, emotional support dogs. So can you kind of just tell me the differences between those?
Sure. You want to start with service dogs?
I would say the biggest difference you're going to see with service dogs is training. Service dogs are more highly trained. They are trained very vigorously for public access. So they have to have good manners in public, and they have to be trained to do tasks that are specific to their person's disability. So when you see a service dog with a person, it's a team. It's a team working together. And when you're looking at the other types of dogs, there's a difference.
Very much so. So some of the other types that you hear most commonly are therapy animal and emotional support animal. Therapy animals actually don't help people with disabilities directly. Sometimes they do indirectly. They help people that are in an area. So for instance, if a therapy animal goes to a hospital, there very well might be someone there with a disability, but it's only by accident that they help people with disabilities. They're helping groups of people. Whereas the emotional support animals and service animals specifically help one person with a disability. And the big thing, again, as Kate was saying, is training. Emotional support animals don't require training. Yooper Service Dogs highly, highly recommends that you get obedience training for your emotional support animal. If you are having anxiety issues and that dog is peeing all over your house and counter surfing and all kinds of stuff, obviously that's not going to help very much. So we highly recommend getting obedience training, but it isn't required. So the training is the big piece of that, both the tasks and the public access training being required for service animals, but not for emotional support animals. Another big piece is the where they're allowed, which where emotional support animals can go and where service animals can go is a big difference.
Because
too.
only service animals are protected under the ADA, the American with Disabilities Acts. So emotional support animals are not protected under that particular law. So, and again, we were talking about this earlier. We have a case where this person sued a hotel and he had an emotional support animal, but he thought he had a service animal.
Yeah.
But the business had to go through defending itself in a lawsuit when he didn't have any tasks. The dog did give him comfort. He did need that dog, but that dog was not a service animal. So a lot of people have misconceptions, especially people who have emotional support animals.
So where are emotional support animals allowed to go?
Emotional support animals are just for at home. They are protected under the Fair Housing Act, so that you can have an emotional support animal even in some places that may not permit pets.
And what we actually find is we get a lot of complaints over what people call fake service animals. And a lot of people assume that someone who has a, quote, fake service animal is intentionally committing fraud, and that's actually not the case. Most people, I would say, now we don't have actual stats, but just an estimate over the information that I get from businesses and from handlers both. I've had handlers call me and admit that they have an emotional support animal without realizing they're admitting that even. So they're upset that this business kicked them out and come to talk to them, and the dog doesn't actually have any training, but they honestly believed that that dog was a service dog, because the laws can be a little bit difficult for some people to find and differentiate, especially since a lot of times people that have emotional support animals, I shouldn't say a lot of times, sometimes, they also have learning disabilities. So it can be difficult for someone without those barriers to decipher the law and figure out how exactly it works for, I have this emotional support animal, or I have this dog with this level of training, since they don't usually have most people don't understand the definitions very well. I have this dog with this level of training, where is it allowed? Many times they misinterpret those things, or they aren't sure. So what actually happens when you say fake service animal, the vast majority of the time that is someone with a real disability, a legitimate need for the dog, but the dog doesn't have any training, and therefore it isn't allowed in public, as I understand.
It does not have any rights to public access. And even fully trained service animals who do have rights to public access, again, that's limited by the standard of reasonable accommodation. A business doesn't have to make unreasonable accommodations. So we were talking about shopping carts earlier.
Right.
And under reasonable accommodations, shopping carts, the business is not required to provide you with a shopping cart for your dog. And in a lot of cases, people who have service animals wouldn't think of putting their animal in a shopping cart because of the tasks that they have to perform. So that would be a major indicator, because I'm sure a lot of businesses aren't sure. Can you tell them that they can't put their dog in a shopping cart? And according to the definitions under reasonable accommodation, if that's a service dog, one, they probably not trying to put it in a shopping cart, and two, if they are, under reasonable accommodation, the business isn't required to provide that. And the same thing goes again with the motorized carts that people ride around.
Yeah, they're not required to.
They're not
provide
required
those
to
and
provide
stuff.
that either.
Definitely. And then, so when it comes to having your service dog at a store, what is kind of the protocol for that? Like, what's required of having a service dog in a store?
Well, one of the biggest things there, I would say, would be, how does a business even know that it's a service animal? How do they know whether they can permit this animal or not, or
Right.
should permit it?
Well, first of all, are the two questions that you ask. Do you have a disability, and what task is the dog trained to do? So, and it does have to be a task that's related to your disability, and there have to be two parts to that task. First of all, the dog has to recognize something. Say the dog recognizes you're about to have an anxiety attack, or your blood pressure is going up. Then the dog has to be trained to perform a task that's related to what they just recognized. So if I say, the dog is going to nudge my leg when I start to dissociate, or if I start to get loopy or something, I might use a different term for it. That's a specific task. If I say, well, the dog provides comfort, makes me feel better, that's not a specific task. So those are the two things you want to look for. You want to identify that the person does have a disability, even if you can't see it, and it's not really good to say you don't look like you have a disability, because a lot of disabilities are invisible, but they're real.
Right, and that's actually a really good point, because most of the things that service dogs help people with are invisible disabilities. And even some of the stereotyped things like hearing impairments. What does a hearing impairment look like? There are people that have mobility impairments that don't happen to use a cane or a walker or a wheelchair because it's an upper body impairment. They can walk okay for the most part, but if they drop something on the floor, they can't pick it up because they have upper back problems and that type of thing. So there's a lot of different things. There's also seizures and autism, PTSD, diabetes. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that service dogs help with that are not obvious to look at that person. So that is one thing, just because it doesn't look like they have a disability really doesn't mean anything, so don't worry about that part. I do see businesses sometimes when they start struggling with these untrained dogs in their businesses, they start getting suspicious naturally because they have to protect their business. They have a living to make, and they have employees to keep employed and keep food on their families' tables, and they aren't sure exactly what to do in order to be successful and legally keep those untrained dogs out of the stores, while allowing the dogs that are doing what they're supposed to, that are trained how they're supposed to, and are being used responsibly. So that's one thing that we definitely like to help out with and hope to cover fairly extensively today. So.
Right, and the thing too is, even a fully trained service dog is still a dog. They could have a bad day, and if a fully trained service dog urinates on the floor in a store, the manager or the employees can request that the dog be removed from the store and that the handler return without the dog. So you could politely say, is there somebody who can watch your dog for you? Is there a place where your dog can be? You're welcome to come back, but the dog just urinated on the floor and won't be allowed in here.
Right, right. And that's a really good thing, is that we're always trying to avoid confrontations in any way, the way we're trying to teach people, the way you can approach things. If you allow a screaming match to occur, this is as a handler or as a business, if you allow that to happen, tempers are going to flare. You're more likely for somebody to want to sue or do something, or people don't want to listen, and it makes a lot harder to resolve things peacefully. And then sometimes that already occurred, and then people are calling me wanting me to mediate, and I'm like, oh goodness, I got to put out the fire first. You know, it kind of it gets a little crazy.
It does. It gets very sticky.
So I always recommend, no matter if that other person starts yelling, whether you're the handler or the business, if one of them starts yelling, you don't start. There's no point. It's not going to get you anywhere. And sometimes you can calm the situation back down and actually allow conversation to continue just because you didn't match their tone of voice or their loudness or whatever was going on there. So, and presenting other ideas like solution to their problem, because obviously they have to figure out what to do with their dog now if something has happened that they're asking the dog be removed from the store. Helping to solve that new problem that they have now also can help a customer get past the outrage of, oh my goodness, you just did this, because a lot of times that customer thinks that they have rights that they don't. So it can be, understandably, they're upset because they think their rights are being violated. So that's one of those things, just always make sure you go into that situation planning to keep a low key. There's no reason to get out of control, even if they do. And there's just no advantage to that. If that handler gets really upset, it wouldn't surprise me in that case there, I don't know this, but it wouldn't surprise me if that case with the motel you were talking about earlier, if that's exactly what happened. Tempers flared.
Yes, he got very upset and was convinced that there was emotional...
and that pushes people to sue.
Emotional damage, because, and it does, because you get very emotional about it.
Or they start
and
getting on
people,
social media or whatever,
Right.
and just silliness happens then. You can't do anything useful when that happens. So.
And when somebody has an emotional support animal, they have a need for that emotional support animal, and that's why that's what it is. That's why it has some. It doesn't really have protections under the law, and it doesn't have a right to public access, but it's recognized as necessary for a person who legitimately does have a disability.
Right, which is part of the thing that causes the confusion is one thing I do see, and I kind of wanted to touch on this as far as people that are out there that maybe you just learned that you have an emotional support animal and you realize now that, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to go in public, I'm not really sure. You can absolutely give us a call, and I'm sure you guys will have our contact information on your website there. You can absolutely give us a call and clarify those things and get an idea how to do that, because we want to see you get help too. This isn't about, oh my goodness, those fakes. No, it's people need legitimate help here. And if you are one of these people that you have a dog you just realized is an emotional support animal, contact us. Maybe we can help you get training. If you really need that dog in public, maybe we can get it to a point where that's going to work out. And something else that people don't realize is a lot of times when you have an emotional support animal used in public, dog specifically is what I'll talk about since that's my area here, it's actually a very unhealthy situation for both the person and the dog to be taking that dog with them everywhere they go, because an unhealthy dependence is created on both the dog but also the dog on the handler. That dog tends to develop anxiety problems because not just separation anxiety, but many other things that occur, and that person gets this dependence on the emotional support animal. It's, in a way, it's almost like a blankie. It's like a comfort zone. And it's a very unhealthy thing that can happen because they get a false sense of security from the dog, and that can actually inhibit their ability to improve. There are some disabilities that can improve. It depends on what it is, obviously, of course, but some disabilities absolutely can improve, and your ability potentially to improve in that situation, you are inhibiting by taking that dog with you everywhere that you go. And making it this magic cure almost that you're kind of doing.
Right.
Especially with small breeds, a lot of times they will carry the dog, and then that dog becomes a physical barrier between them and the world, and they actually start retreating from the world. I mean, there's just so many things that can occur with that. So it's not just a legal thing, it's actually a very important practical thing, both for the owner's health and for the dog's health too, to leave those untrained dogs at home.
Right. And people do make the same argument about service dogs, that you're going to become dependent on the service dog rather than dealing with your disability in different ways. But there is a big difference, and I think before a psychiatrist or a doctor recommends that an individual have a service dog, they've gone over possible treatment plans and whether or not the service dog is actually going to assist with their disability or if they're going to become dependent on this dog because of their disability. So it's not something that's done lightly. I don't think the doctors, the psychiatrists recommend this lightly. And in fact, people resist it. I resisted it. I didn't want a service dog. I wanted, because I thought, well, put a sign on my forehead now. Everybody knows.
Right, it's because you're anonymous before, and now
Right.
you have a four-legged billboard telling everybody that you're disabled. So, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's not something that's done lightly, and so education, I think, is really the biggest key, because people who have disabilities, who have a legitimate service dog, who go through the training, it's huge, and you really have to be very, very careful about presenting yourself as a team when you're out in public.
Definitely. And is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on, but regarding legalities of anything?
Service dogs in training.
That's actually what I was just thinking. Yep,
Service
absolutely.
dogs in
There's
training.
one sort of a subcategory there.
Okay.
Right. So service dogs in training, even though the statutes mention service dogs in training
In the past.
in the past, the prior statute in Michigan allowed service dogs in training in public places when those dogs were handled by handlers from a specific list. But that list does not exist anymore, and that actually has been gotten rid of. So you really can't be taking your service dog in training into and expecting public access. You shouldn't be taking them into a restaurant, you shouldn't be taking them into the grocery store, you shouldn't be taking them into places that don't allow pets. I mean,
Right.
if you go to the park and other people are walking dogs in the park, take your service dog in training and go to the park.
Right.
But when it comes to public access, service dogs in training do not have any rights, and they don't have any protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And that's one I run into a lot. A lot of times I'll see people taking puppies into a store with a service dog vest on the puppy. And because someone at some point has told them, oh, well, just start taking them everywhere. That's how you acclimate them. That's how you do public access training. Well, you do the public access training to make sure they don't mess up in public. So if you're already in public, that just practically doesn't work out. And that's just not reasonable for a business, too. That dog doesn't have the proper training. I have seen this cause a lot of issues from the law that I think was done away with in 2016
Right.
that had previously said that, is a lot of people think that law is still around. And I've heard of dog trainers telling people, oh, just go take them to the grocery store or off here, just take them with you on your regular day. Take them with you everywhere, that'll just naturally train them. That's not how it works. You're taking them into places that, for that dog, it's like they just landed on Mars. You are teaching them anxiety because they're going into this place that is already overwhelming. It's already more that they can handle. And then you're keeping them in that place. So you are then creating anxiety and making them associate that place with anxiety. So you're actually deepening the anxiety of that dog. There's a few exceptions of a dog might end up being okay with that because he had the right temperament, but that's pretty rare. We do temperament testing, and only about 10 to 15% of the dogs I've ever tested actually passed our temperament test. So it is pretty specific. Anxiety being one of the biggest things that you really have to watch out for in a dog. A lot of people don't realize that's such a big problem. is if you have a dog that's anxious, that's actually a form of fear, and fear is where aggression comes from. And that's why when we were talking about these fake service animals, really just untrained dogs that for whatever the reason is, usually it's emotional support animals, occasionally it's someone with a pet they didn't want to leave in the car. They walk into the store and the employee's not really sure what to say, so they don't say anything, and then the customer assumes that the place is pet friendly. Businesses watching this, putting up no pet signs just to clarify that can make a lot of difference, because a lot of times those people really just, oh, well, apparently they're pet friendly. They didn't say anything. They would have said something, wouldn't they? Because they don't realize there's this service dog confusion too. So that can be a big thing that can help with the other category. Those are the two main categories there with service, with the untrained dogs that are used in public. So.
Right. And do we have a minute to discuss leashes? Service dogs do have to be tethered. They have to be on a leash. And there's only one very, very, very narrow exception. Say if you have a dog who's trained to do a task that the leash will interfere with, the dog can be off leash, but only to perform that task, and then needs to be back on leash again. So especially when service dogs are in public, they need to be on a leash, and they need to be under their handler's control when they're working.
Alrighty, yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this information that I'm sure many people don't even know about. But we'll have more information on our website. We'll have Katie's contact information as well as some links she provided for us. But you can check those out and tune to Local 3 News tonight at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock Central for more local news, weather, and sports.